Attempt to share my screen here. Let's see. Can y'all see that?
Yes.
It looked like somebody was in the lobby.
Maybe we can figure that out. Hang on. Participants. I don't see anybody in the lobby. Looks
Nor
like
do I.
Might be Julia, because she was invited.
She is invited. She might join us later. She is in class tonight.
Awesome. Oh, no, I do not want to leave this meeting. Absolutely not. Okay. All right. So y'all can see my screen. Awesome. I have a lot of slides tonight. I probably won't get through them all. So if there's a part of the agenda that is really exciting to you, please let me know and I can focus on that. I'm really excited to talk to you all about my topic tonight. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my thesis research as well as some of the lessons learned from my job at the NC Museum of Natural Sciences as a climate change educator. So hopefully some of this will be relevant to your context, your work contexts, or things that you want to be doing. That's what we hope. So to open, I'd love to engage with you all. Since we have a small group, you can feel free to unmute or you can type in the chat. What is one way you could or currently do collaborate with youth in the work that you do? Love to hear some feedback.
I'm a Girl Scout leader.
Awesome. So your whole job. That's great.
And I'm an educator.
Oh, no, that's a volunteer position.
Oh, your volunteer position. Okay, yes. But obviously collaborating with youth in that position, definitely.
Hi, I'm a communications specialist for the city of Kannapolis. It's right outside of Charlotte, and part of my position is working with our youth council and also doing civic education for elementary schoolers for third graders.
Awesome. That is great. Definitely related to some of the things I'm going to touch on today. So thanks for being here.
Youth homeschoolers come and help volunteer with our gardens and some of our environmental ed research at the park I work at.
Awesome. Is that Lake Crabtree?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Yep. I saw you rolling around on the golf cart recently, Susan. I was at Lake Crabtree out on the paddleboard on Lake
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was me. Sundays are my day until we can find some more staff.
Yep. Yeah. Awesome. So working with youth volunteers, definitely. Kyle, what about you?
We do youth paddling programs here at Lake Johnson. We do an array of programs aimed at youth, everything from like orienteering to animal and plant ID.
Awesome. So sounds like we're all pretty familiar working with youth. Today I'm going to be talking specifically about how we can collaborate with youth to take climate action and highlighting some youth projects that the youth in my program did. First, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. So like I said, I work for the NC Museum of Natural Sciences. That's kind of the hat I'm wearing tonight through this presentation, but I have many other roles. As Sheila and I were talking about earlier, I also work for the Clean Water Education Partnership as the education and outreach coordinator for them. So I do some stormwater education. I'm a grad student at Western Carolina University, getting my master's in experiential and outdoor ed. I also used to be an AmeriCorps member, which is definitely tied to my identity as an environmental educator. That was a really formative time for me to learn more about living in North Carolina, traveling for work, and also how to facilitate really quality EE programs. And way back in 2016, I graduated from Goshen College, a small liberal arts school in Indiana, with a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Science and a minor in English. So that's kind of an overview of who I am. And if any of this resonates with you, please, I'd love to connect with you on any of these roles that I have previously played and currently play. So kind of an overview of what I'm going to do today. I'll talk a little bit about youth and climate change from the perspective of like a theory base, kind of thinking about my thesis research. Then I'll introduce the Yes Resilience program that I've been teaching in the past year, talking about teens and virtual programs and strategies for success. So if you're thinking about engaging with youth in a virtual or hybrid setting, this section might be interesting to you. Talking about some of the teen climate action projects that my youth did, and then also how that ties again into my thesis research. So you all might be familiar with Greta Thunberg, one of the very famous climate activists who also happens to be 17 years old. So kind of an overview of the youth and climate change literature. There is obviously urgency behind taking climate action in the youth space. Youth are particularly vulnerable to climate change and they're disproportionately impacted. They're one of many populations that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Other populations include the elderly, people who live in low-income neighborhoods, BIPOC communities, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, coastal communities. The list goes on. You might be familiar with other vulnerable populations. Another sort of challenge and barrier that youth face in taking climate action, and especially like political and policy related action, is adultism. So youth experience discrimination for their age. People don't think that they're old enough or mature enough to be a part of political conversations. Youth also often get overlooked as key stakeholders, key community stakeholders, because of their age. But as we see in the media, the national, international media, and also at the local scale, youth are taking climate action, and they are often doing so without adult allies. And so one of the questions I'm really interested in looking at in my thesis research is how do adults collaborate with youth to take climate action, and more broadly, civic engagement with youth. I think that's a really important topic that's understudied in the literature and really key, especially for thinking about how we're going to address and tackle really large global scale issues like climate change. Kind of delving into the literature a little bit more. So climate literacy is a really important goal of climate change education, and sort of spanning that umbrella literature are three key ideas. So one of them is in order for youth to be climate literate, they need to understand the science of climate change. So clarifying misperceptions such as the difference between weather and climate is really key. This can take place as young as first or second grade. Thinking about weather systems, sometimes even pre-K and kindergarten are talking about different kinds of weather. And that can really set the stage for thinking and talking about climate later on in upper elementary, middle, and high school. Communication. So a lot of climate change education and communication is doom and gloom. Thinking about the very recent IPCC report, not looking good for our future. So thinking about how we can incorporate positive messaging that does instill hope while still communicating the reality of what climate change is currently how it's currently impacting our life and how it will continue to. And thirdly, decision making is a really important kind of last step of climate literacy. So how do we take a climate literate youth group and turn that into action. So the decision-making part is kind of the link between climate literacy and climate action. And there's a lot of literature to support that. Sharing personal stories, doing climate storytelling, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It's a strategy we used in my climate program. Can be really powerful, not only for youth to have agency over their own voice, but also for adults hearing those stories. It can be really powerful to hear youth talk about climate change and climate impacts from their own experience, their own positionality. Narrowing even more through the climate change education literature, this particular framework that's housed in transformative sustainability education is really important to my thesis work, so I wanted to bring it in here. Thinking about the head, heart, hands model. If you're familiar with 4-H, this might sound familiar. Head, heart, hands are 3 of the 4 H's. This model has also been used in leadership development. It's been used in the informal and formal education space, but really kind of combining all of these different really important parts of understanding climate change. So the emotional learning part, thinking about, again, storytelling, personal connections to climate change, thinking about how to process climate change, and it can be a really overwhelming topic for people. So really engaging with the emotions that come up when talking about climate change and working through those. The head is the cognitive learning. So this is sort of the scientific understanding, the being able to look at maps and data and interpret them, clarifying misperceptions like the difference between climate and weather, etc. And then thirdly, the hands. So this is the physical and active learning component, really the what I see as the like taking action, taking community action piece. And so this is a framework that you might consider using in your lesson planning or in your curriculum planning, and also in your more informal engagement with youth. You can think about the things that you do in these 3 sort of broad buckets. So moving into the climate program that I taught in, so the YES Resilience program stands for Youth Engaging in the Science of Resilience Teen Climate Ambassador Program. This program ran from August of 2020 to June of 2021, so it's currently finished. We finished up at the end of June with our youth, but we are now creating curriculum based off of what we did with our youth during the pilot study. And this curriculum is going to be free and downloadable online starting in the spring of 2022. So please keep your eyes out for this if this is something you're interested in using with youth. Everything that we did in this program that resonated with the youth and we got positive feedback on will be in that curriculum. So just wanted to throw that out there, that this is definitely something you can bring into your own spaces where you work with youth. So the Teen Climate Ambassadors, kind of broadly, the goals of this program were to explore local impacts of climate change in youth's various communities, thinking about how to increase community resilience and solutions to climate change. And then lastly, they were encouraged, not required, to complete a resilience building community action project, which you'll see examples of later on. These are some pictures of some of our youth. We really focused on recruiting youth who are underrepresented in STEM careers. So women, other gender minorities, racial minorities, and we had a really broad kind of pool of applicants. We actually got over 100 applicants for this program and ended up selecting around 50 youth to begin with. So yeah, it was a really competitive program and really highlighted for us the need to do more informal climate change education. We had 2 program cohorts in this pilot study. So the first was in Raleigh, the second was in Whiteville, and Raleigh is obviously an urban area. Whiteville is in eastern North Carolina, kind of towards the coast. And one of the questions that the researchers who were involved in this study were looking at is thinking about the differences between urban and rural youth experiences with climate change. And does their understanding, are they starting from the same place of understanding when it comes to climate science? And what are the examples that come up when they're thinking about climate change in their community? So that was a really key focus area of this project. Just briefly, kind of looking at where the youth in this program lived, or still do live, many of them. You can see the Raleigh cohort kind of centered around Raleigh, but we did have several rural students from rural counties involved in the Raleigh cohort as well. And then the Whiteville cohort, many of our students were from Wilmington, so it didn't end up being exclusively rural and urban between the Raleigh and Whiteville cohorts. We did have more ambassadors in the Raleigh cohort, that sort of being because the museum in Raleigh is much larger, has a broader pool of youth involved in programming, and just the nature of a lot more engagement at that museum. Whiteville's a newer location, so that was kind of one of the reasons we had a larger cohort in Raleigh. As I said, this program ran until June 2021, and most of our programming was facilitated on Zoom. We did end up having a 3-day summer institute that was largely in person. There were virtual options for students who wanted to participate virtually, but we had sort of these 4 components of our programming that we wanted to highlight. So the first is we had 7 half-day academies that happened on Zoom on Saturdays for about 4 hours. And we always had about an hour, sometimes longer, break during that programming where students were offline outside collecting data or engaging with other material away from our Zoom. We also had a 3-day summer institute, which took place at the end of our program. Originally, it was going to be at the beginning, but we moved it. And that was really our first time meeting our students in person. And it was the first time all of our participants had met in person too. So it was really a special kind of culminating experience that we had. We did 10 climate leadership sessions that happened about once a month throughout the program, and those were on weeknights. They were 90-minute sessions and much more sort of informal and chill compared to the half-day academies. So we thought about leadership opportunities. We gave them time to work on their action projects. We tried to always provide a space for them to really casually engage with each other instead of feeling like they were always in this academic program. And finally, the youth action projects. So all 4 of these components kind of came together to formulate the meat of our program. And just briefly, we did have an education team, which I was a part of, as well as a research and evaluation team, which were looking at those research questions, kind of thinking about rural versus urban youth, as well as evaluating each of our program elements that we did with students. We had evaluations after every session that we did. Okay, so I don't want to talk this whole time, and I'd love to share this video with you all. So I am gonna stop sharing and make sure you can hear my volume real quick. So I don't think I checked that box. Yeah, include computer sound. Okay. Here we go. So hopefully you can hear us. Let me know if you can't. And this will give you a little taste of what our summer institute looked like with our participants.
In North Carolina, we've certainly been seeing the impacts of climate change. If we can raise up a generation of new leaders who are really aware not only of the challenges that we face, but of creative solutions to those challenges, I think we'll be in a better position to respond. So the Youth Engaging in the Science of Resilience program is an NSF-funded program in partnership with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh. We saw this as an opportunity for them to apply what they've been learning throughout the program. So we used colored masking tape to lay out a fictitious city that we modeled after downtown Raleigh. And then we divided the students into different sectors of the city. So we had a public health and emergency preparedness sector. We had an energy and transportation sector, for instance. So we tasked the students with really taking ownership of their sector and then thinking about what needs to be in their city in order to make sure every resident has what they need to thrive. The Center for Public Engagement with Science, we've been doing environmental science programming for youth for many years, but this is one of the first times that we've gotten to conduct research on the knowledge and skills and outcomes that are community focused of the programming that we're doing. So we're excited to learn more about environmental health literacy, which is how do youth take environmental knowledge and environmental health knowledge and turn it into action? And what are some of the variables, like their beliefs and their motivations, that influence those outcomes?
The museum and the university have these great connections and researchers who want to connect with our audiences, with middle schoolers and high schoolers. And so they are able to use the connections of both institutions and meet people who are doing this work.
This partnership is a different type of science communication, connecting UNC to partners in the state who are not academic partners really enables us to expand the reach of the university and be a force for good in communities across the state.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little taste of our programming and what some of our youth were up to during the Summer Institute. I hope we don't. Okay, so kind of moving into what we learned during this program, thinking about some of the successful strategies that might be useful to you. So one of the things that a lot of educators use that we found successful were making sure that all of our sessions had icebreakers. So we always started our sessions with a quick question or activity. This was especially important when we were conducting virtual lessons, because we wanted to make sure that the youth could ground what we were doing, that they could sort of ease into the material, that we weren't just jumping right into like a PowerPoint or an activity, for example, that they had some time to sort of ease into the Zoom space. Another really important thing that we did was making sure that the participants had a choice over how they engaged with content. And so we almost always provided multiple ways that they could engage with the activities like before and after our session. So we would give them podcasts, videos, web maps, all sorts of different ways that they could engage with the content in whatever way was most conducive to their learning style. We were sort of building the plane as we flew it while we were doing this program. And so one of the things we incorporated because of youth feedback was this idea of teen leaders. So we would meet with teens for about a half hour before our long 4-hour sessions, and we would give them responsibilities like leading the breakout rooms during the Zoom session. And this gave them an opportunity to practice some of the leadership skills we were talking about in our climate leadership sessions. And it also gave them an opportunity to like lead their peers and engage with the content more deeply, because they often had to do like an additional thing to lead. And that was a really powerful part of our programming. We had almost half of our teens volunteer to be leaders during our sessions, which was really cool. And they all had really different facilitation styles, which I loved. And it also allowed some of the staff to take a step back and check in instead of leading the breakout room. So I think it ended up being a really successful strategy. And lastly, we provided incentives for participating in our program, especially in the virtual space. This was really important. We were competing with students being on Zoom for their entire week and then coming on again on Saturday. And so we wanted to make this fun and worthwhile for them. We offered door prizes during every one of our sessions, so students could like get a book, be entered into a drawing to get a book or another like relevant prize. And they also got compensated for their participation in our program through an attendance stipend if they attended a certain number of sessions. So if you have the funds to do that, we found it really important to make sure that our teens were compensated for all of the time and work they were putting into this program. So an example of an icebreaker that we did, we asked the students, why should I care about sea level rise? And we used a virtual whiteboard tool called Padlet to collect responses for this. And you can see the wide variety of responses from economic impacts to restaurants and car dealerships to global island communities to wildlife. And so our youth really took this question to mean something at all different scales. And that was something that we found really important, was to make sure that our teens were engaging with climate change at multiple scales. We definitely focused on the regional and local scale, but making sure that we contextualize that within the global and national scene of what's happening with climate change was really important. Thinking about our program structure and content and our strategies for success, again, during our long 4-hour Zoom sessions, we always had offline time for participants to complete an outdoor off-screen mission. We made sure that we did most of our content outside of our sessions together and really prioritized discussions and interactive activities during our live sessions together. We invited local experts to come and speak with our students and engage with Q&As, and that allowed us, we were a staff of, the education team was 4 white women and 1 Black woman. So it allowed us to bring in more diverse, racially diverse and gender diverse guests into our space to talk about their experiences with climate change and how they were engaging with this at multiple different levels. And lastly, we tried to make our program structure and content really relevant by making connections to human health, culture, and place. So thinking about that place-based education is even possible in the virtual space, even though it looks a little bit different. This is an example of a pre-activity that we did with students, kind of thinking about that outside time that they would use to prep for our lessons. So we had them think about the 4 different parts of the climate tree. And this activity really helped the youth think about the systemic underlying issues related to a climate threat like extreme rainfall and flooding. So you can see here one of our students, Nikki, was thinking about extreme rainfall and flooding and connected this to development in her community and how that was sort of an underlying issue for why there were areas in her community that were flooding. These are some examples of some of the guests that we had come and speak with our youth. And you'll see later on that one of these speakers, Melody Hunter-Pillion here in the center, who is creating a podcast series of interviewing Black farmers in Eastern North Carolina, actually inspired one of our student action projects. So you'll see that later. But this really kind of allowed us to make these, especially talking about climate solutions and climate storytelling, real for our students. Tom Butler is a great example of that. He is a hog farmer who's doing a lot with kind of creative renewable energy sources from the hog lagoon, and also he has a solar microgrid. So pretty cool examples of thinking really creatively about climate change, which inspired a lot of our students. How am I doing on time here?
You're looking good. It's 7:40. I'd like to leave maybe 5 or so minutes at the end for questioning, Hannah.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so a lot of this you probably already know, but just thinking about the trade-offs and challenges of being in the virtual space, we had to make sure we had multiple communication methods with our students. Many of them did not respond to emails and left their videos off during our sessions. So we had to make sure that we had like a texting mechanism. We used an app that teachers use called Remind. That was really helpful. We also had to change a lot of our programming to virtual, which we weren't planning on doing. That put a lot of pressure on our education staff to think differently about how we were going to engage with these subjects. We were initially planning on doing monthly field trips, but obviously we had to change that because of COVID. So yeah, it was definitely a test of resilience for our education team, as well as thinking about community resilience and climate resilience. Just kind of briefly, I think I'm gonna skip over this slide, but I can share these with you if you want to go back and read. These are just some student reflections on our different sessions, and basically some major themes that students highlighted were that these sessions, even though they were virtual, were highly interactive and really helped students make these tangible connections to climate change in their community. One of the ways that we did that was through telling climate stories. And so we posed this sort of statement to the students and had them think about how they could tell an engaging narrative about them and climate change. And we really tried to emphasize that it's not a story unless you tell it. So we wanted it to be a youth voice, and we also wanted them to recognize that if you write the story and you don't share it, then your story isn't having the impact that it could have. So we encouraged them to make videos and make elevator pitches about their action projects and all sorts of different strategies to think about how they could communicate about climate change with others in their friend groups, in their family, at their school, etc. This is kind of the scaffolding that we created for climate stories. So this was a really helpful lens and frame for students to really delve into their story. We noticed that it was really hard to get students to think about a specific event in our program, or a specific event in their life, or a specific part of their action project to focus on. They were talking very broadly about climate change. And so we challenged them to use this scaffold to create their climate stories. And I'm going to play a video now of one of our students, Nikki, who's in the Whiteville cohort. And you can get a sense of her climate story, kind of, she's going to talk about her action project. But I wanted to include youth voice in this because I think it's really important for us to hear youth talk about climate change. It's really powerful. So again, I think I need to make sure that my volume is shareable. So hang on a sec. I want to make sure you guys can hear this. I'm gonna stop presenting for a second. Include computer sound. Okay. Awesome.
Imagine sitting in your 7th grade Earth and Environmental Science class. The topic of the day is written on the board: climate change. You think it may be about the changing seasons or about how different biomes have different climates. Instead, you are met with something completely different. Your teacher explains to your class that climate change is a human-driven occurrence due to growing greenhouse gas emissions that caused the Earth to warm steadily over the past couple centuries. These gases act as a shield in the Earth's atmosphere, preventing solar radiation from filtering out, causing the Earth to get warmer and warmer. At the sound of this, your heart begins beating faster and faster. You raise your hand and are called on. You ask in a weary voice, "So did we fix it? What happened to solve the warming?" You are then told the most troubling information. The problem has not been solved, and in fact, it continues to get worse each year with more extreme weather, melting ice caps, and sinking islands. You think silently to yourself, "I have to solve this problem." Although I didn't learn about climate change in quite the same way, my reaction was very similar. I knew I had to be the one to solve this potentially catastrophic problem. Ever since I was little, I have always been passionate about nature, preserving it, as well as the animals and plants that inhabit natural spaces. This is one of the reasons I decided to take a class at my school called Oceanography. My teacher posted on Google Classroom about a program called Teen Climate Ambassadors, a program focusing on students that wanted to learn more about the science behind climate change, its effects, and most importantly, its solutions. It seemed right up my alley, so I decided to apply. I was accepted. The story is pretty straight from here. I attended monthly half-day academies and later climate action sessions. As time went by, I began to find that I was less alone in my care about the climate crisis than I had initially assumed. There were many people who care about the environment and work in their daily lives to try and mitigate their climate footprint. After a few months of being in the program, Teen Climate Ambassadors were introduced to the idea of an action project, an assignment in which you develop a project that will take action in your community to address climate change. At first, my ideas were scattered and confused. I wasn't sure what I was going to do or how big I wanted my project to be. In my hunt to find a good project, I came across an organization called the Wilmington Tree Initiative and the Alliance for Cape Fear Trees, both of which work to plant trees in the Wilmington area. I loved their mission and decided I would volunteer. Along with getting to plant trees, I also got to meet new people and make connections with people who planted these trees. During one of the tree plantings, I was even interviewed on WWAY News, which was a really cool experience. After this, I decided I wanted my project to be a tree planting and decided to reach out to the Pender County Parks and Rec Department about possibly planting trees in a local park. Luckily, Parks and Rec already had several longleaf pine seedlings that they were in need of planting, and so when I offered to organize volunteers and pick a date for the event, they seemed willing to help me. Fast forward to a month or so later after lots of emails. The date to plant the trees had come, April 10th. Myself, my sister, my friend Megan, Whiteville leader Taylor, and Samantha from Parks and Rec all joined on the outskirts of a new neighborhood to plant around 30 seedlings. All I can say is that it was a great feeling knowing that I was doing something good for my community and Earth. At first, when I started planning my project months prior, I was anxious about reaching out to my local government or adults for help with my project, but by the end, I felt like I was a seasoned pro. Although I wasn't able to do anything huge, my project was a first step in my journey to solve climate change. Adults and teenagers should not be scared to reach out to their local governments with concerns or ideas regarding how the environment is being managed. Even if it is just planting a tree in your front yard, it is a step in the right direction. At the end of the day, like many, I am not sure how this problem will be solved. I've juggled with ideas like being an engineer and possibly engineering some type of carbon filtering machine that takes excess carbon dioxide out of the air, or possibly being a lawmaker that can put laws in place to help protect the environment. I'm not quite sure yet, but one thing I do know is I am going to be a part of the solution, no matter what I choose to do. And you can too.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little sense about how students put the scaffolding into action. I'm going to skip ahead here and talk about a couple of other action projects. So this was one that two of our students did. They made art out of disposable and recycled materials. So most of these are endangered species, invasive species, or other animals that have been impacted by an environmental, they're either like rare, they're invasive, or they were impacted by like an environmental issue like DDT. So this eagle is made all out of styrofoam and paper, and it goes along with this fish diagram that you see here. And it's kind of meant to represent like bioaccumulation up the food chain. And I really loved this project because I think it's a great example of how the students can use so many different forms to communicate about environmental issues and climate issues. And the sea turtle and the hermit crab, for example, I can't remember the exact species names, but both of them are impacted by sea level rise and habitat loss. And so making those connections to climate impacts was really important, and we encouraged the students to do that throughout the program. Our students who made these sculptures had a live exhibit at the museum, and they had QR codes with all of the different recycling programs in the triangle that people could take pictures of and learn more about what's recyclable in their community. They also did like a recycling game where people could, where they challenged the people who came up to the booth to sort the different items into recyclable and not recyclable as a way to communicate about how sometimes what we think is recyclable isn't, and thinking about the challenges in education, environmental education in that realm. Just really quickly, I wanted to share a final action project, Emerald. She was really inspired by our agriculture session where we had Melody Hunter-Pillion come and talk about her podcast that she was developing. And Emerald decided to make her own podcast about food, because food is a really important part of her culture and her experience in the US. And so she has a plan to make 3 podcast episodes. The first one is her food story, and then she's going to interview her agriculture teacher and a sustainable farmer who lives outside of Durham. And so I just wanted to play quickly a clip of her her action project, and this is her food story. Let me know if you can hear this.
To conclude, I'll share one of my food memories. The one I'm thinking about was in Christmas of 2019 in Nigeria, in Mboku, the village I'm from. And it was in my grandfather's house. We were on the veranda. I was with my Auntie Sonto and my grandmother and my Auntie Patience. And we were just there on the veranda making chin chin. And for those of you who don't know, chin chin is a Nigerian snack. It's a fried sweet dough. It's cut into little cubes or strips, and it's usually flavored with nutmeg or African nutmeg, which is called ehuru. And we were just there, and it was late at night and we were just cutting and rolling on the veranda. Yeah, it was a nice time. The propane gas cooker was going, and we were just working through these massive enamel basins full of dough. I don't even know why we had that much, but we did.
So there's a little sneak peek of Emerald's action project. We're hoping that we can publish her podcast once they're finished on our UNC website. So be on the lookout for those. And just sort of to conclude, I think I'm going to skip this last part in the interest of time, but I wanted to highlight this because I think it's really related to the sort of youth adult partnership topic that I'm really interested in exploring through my research. We engaged in a lot of different strategies to try to encourage youth in their action projects and partner with them. So the first thing that we did was we made sure that youth had time while me and some of the other staff were available to work on their projects, so that they could ask questions, they could bounce ideas off of us, they could find other youth in the program to do their action project with. So we always left time for that during our climate leadership sessions. We also scheduled weekly office hours, which were really helpful for our students. Most of them were virtual, and they had asynchronous school on Wednesdays. And so we had our office hours on Wednesdays, and every student who ended up doing an action project met with us at least once during office hours. And having that mentorship with Taylor and I, where they could ask a quick question and we could answer it, or we could help connect them with someone in their community who was working on a project that they wanted to do, was really key to the success of their projects. Like I said, no one who met with us didn't do an action project, so having that face-to-face time was really important. We also made sure that we gave examples of projects that students could do if they wanted a project that we came up with to engage with. And so an example of that was some students created a webinar, and they did it during the Triangle Learning Days. And we didn't make the presentation, but we provided the space for them to and let them know about an event where they could participate and do the webinar. And lastly, we encourage students not only to do their projects with other students, but also to combine it with a school project that they already had. So for example, the recycled art project was an AP art exhibit. And so in order to make it an action project, we asked them to write artist statements related to the environmental issues that they were addressing through the art. And so, yeah, these were all strategies we found really successful, and specifically related to the action projects, which again was a major part of our program. Just really briefly, I wanted to talk a little bit about my research and how this is related to the program. So I actually am going to be engaging with youth from this program in my research, my thesis research. And specifically, we're going to be thinking about, they're going to be doing research with me. So they're going to be my co-researchers. I'm doing what's called youth participatory action research. And we're going to be doing a climate action project together. So specifically, I'm looking at what are the impacts of a climate action guidebook that we developed throughout this program in the youth planning of the action project. And so how do they utilize this tool, and what sort of feedback do they get to improve it? And then secondly, thinking specifically about my role as the adult in collaborating with youth. So I'll be journaling throughout the process, which will be part of my data, and thinking about how we can create these authentic youth adult partnerships for taking climate action, but also more broadly, taking civic action, or getting youth more involved in their communities. So those are really questions that emerged from this program that I'm really interested in addressing and thinking about in my own research. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can come back to the Teams meeting here. And please let me know if you have any questions or feedback, or you just want to talk more about any of the subjects that I brought up.
I'll ask you a question here, Hannah. How is the climate action group marketed, or kind of how is it known to the youth, like social media or through their schools, or how is it kind of directed to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. We used a lot of different methods. So we had printed flyers that we distributed at in-person events, because this was kind of pre-COVID when we were recruiting. We emailed science department heads and science teachers that some of my staff were connected with through other programs throughout North Central and Eastern North Carolina. We reached out to teens that were engaged at the museum already, both in Raleigh and Whiteville. And we had a lot easier time recruiting students in Raleigh. It was really tough for us to get even 13 participants in Whiteville. We actually ended up accepting every student who applied in Whiteville, and we had to turn away half the students who applied in Raleigh. So definitely highlighted some of the challenges of recruiting in urban versus rural areas, and we learned a lot through that of the importance of in-person recruiting and word of mouth in rural communities.
Very cool. So do they have does the group have social media pages?
We do. We have
Would you like to plug
Instagram that some of the youth are featured on and helped design. I'll type it in the chat. I think this is it. I'm pretty sure this is it. Let me just double check that. Yeah, and actually for, yeah, there's no underscore here. I'll type. It's really just at Yes Resilience. We actually had youth create social media posts for part of their action project and create their own social media accounts. So that was definitely a project that was interesting to youth because many of them had to do virtual projects. Did we receive good feedback from the students? Yes. We had really high evaluation scores for almost all of our sessions. And we're going to be looking more in depth at student responses to those surveys kind of in the next coming months. And that's a part of, that's in part some of the data for the research study. But yeah, we worked really hard and the students really liked it. And I think one of the reasons why they liked it is because we did try really hard to incorporate any feedback that they did give us to improve it. So the like offline mission time during the Saturday academies, we did that because of student response. We did the action leadership sessions on weekdays because students told us that's what they wanted. We ended up having like a book club and like a documentary screening club that came out of student requests for more programming over the winter break. So yeah, we really tried to like provide any sort of response to their feedback that we could in our programming. And I think that was really successful in engaging them and making sure that they felt invested and heard in the program.
Does anybody else have any more burning questions for Hannah? Oh, we got something in the chat.
Yeah, I agree, Margaret. It can be difficult to engage with teens, especially virtually. We had a lot of off Zoom, no cameras. I didn't really know what many of the students looked like before I met them in person during the summer institute. So yeah, thanks, Sheila. Yeah, it was a really fun program to be a part of. I feel so honored that I got to be a part of the staff for this program and bring some of my prior experience mentoring students with action projects. Any attitude issues? That's a great question. We I feel like our kids were just like all stars. The like biggest issue we had was not being able to get in contact with students because they were so busy or overwhelmed with other things, and we were really responsive to their needs too. Like we understood that they didn't want to be on Zoom if they had Zoom school. And so sometimes we would provide like makeup activities that they could do if they just like couldn't be on Zoom anymore. And we just tried to be really persistent. And if students just couldn't participate in the program, we did have some attrition of students who didn't continue after a couple months. But we had a core group of like 20 of our Teen Climate ambassadors who came to like every session. And even an even smaller group within that of like 6 or 7 like really all-star youth that were leading our sessions with us and did action projects and encouraged their peers. And we found the best way to connect with them was that texting the Remind app. Just because they're so responsive to text messages and could barely get in contact with them via email most of the time. So definitely recommend making sure you can have some sort of texting communication with your youth. And Remind is great because it's designed for teacher-student interaction. So it kind of protects that sort of minor issue if you are working with youth. So. Oh, nice. Okay, so Band app, another app you can use. I've also seen people use Discord, which is really a video game streaming platform, but you can create different boards, or Slack is another one that the Wild Center Climate Program uses. So there's lots of really successful apps and strategies you can use to engage youth. I'm glad to hear that that app works well. I'll have to check that out. That seems really cool because you can have everything in one place. We used Google Classroom too. And that seemed to work pretty well because most of our students had Gmail. So we could post announcements on there and it would get sent to their phone like in an alert. So definitely recommend Google Classroom as well. We kind of went the more traditional teacher route, but
I'm kind of in the car, but I just want to say this sounds really great, and I feel like there's the projects sound a lot like bronze, silver, and gold award projects that we try to coach the girls to do.
Yeah, totally.
But that coaching them is, it's its own skill, right? So yeah, anytime I can learn more about how to do that effectively.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. I think youth are so able to do these projects, but they really do need support from mentors, from teachers, from near peers, and from community partners that they can work with. I, in a former role, did a similar mentoring of students through community action projects, and we actually the action project guidebook is based off of the workbook, the Gold Award workbook that the Girl Scouts use. So it's really similar in terms of the structure and some of the pages, like thinking about resources and materials and key players and that kind of thing. And there's so many resources out there for different frameworks to use, but I think it's always good to borrow from organizations that have it really figured out. So thank you, Girl Scouts. We appreciate your leadership in the Action Project department.
That's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I want to go ahead and thank you. Oh, we got one more question. One more snuck in here. I'll let you take it here, Hannah.
Yeah, the ACE program. We actually did a collaborative event with the ACE program. We did a youth changemakers forum, and we had 2 youth from the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative and one UNC student who was involved in a climate action group through campus come and talk to our youth. And we invited all the ACE fellows to come. So we had some of them come to that session. And yes, they focus a lot on climate storytelling and have some great tutorial videos and curriculum. So if you're interested in doing climate change education and you don't want to wait for our curriculum to come out, definitely check out acespace.org, I think is their website. Kyle, I don't think we can hear you. I saw you talking.
All right, let me try that again.
Yeah, there we go.
I want to thank you guys so much for joining us on this lecture tonight. It was a great topic and a great presentation. Again, a big thank you to Hannah for presenting this with us tonight. This will be processed and distributed back to you guys via email, so you guys can re-watch it, re-listen in your own time. And you'll also be getting that nice PDF of your credit for your EE certificate. So thank you guys. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks,
Appreciate
all.
Yep. Bye.
See ya.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.